So Furiosa is a prequel spinoff film to Mad Max Fury Road, which came out in 2015. Mad Max Fury Road was the first Mad Max movie in like 30 years. Director George Miller is the director of all of these feature films, and it took him about 15 years, along with his co-writing partner Nico Latouris, to write Mad Max Fury Road. They were in development for that movie for a very, very long time, and in the midst of making that movie, they fleshed out really, really extensive backstories for all of the characters involved, not just Max himself. And one of those big characters was Imperator Furiosa, and we know that Charlize Theron played that character in Mad Max Fury Road and became hugely popular based on that role just because of the depiction of the character. People very much became attached to her story in that particular movie, and I think a lot of people called to see more of that character. And so shortly thereafter, George Miller decided to go into development on an official Furiosa prequel, but it took a while for it to get made. He had a lawsuit underway with Warner Brothers about a salary dispute. And in addition to that, he also had a lot of bigger plans at play in terms of making an expanded universe in this Mad Max franchise. Him and his writing partner, they developed an anime idea that we're going to do something similar to the Animatrix. They developed comic books, and they were really looking at a way to just expand this world. But I think because of that salary dispute, a lot of those plans got put on pause. However, this film did end up getting made, as we know, and it took a few years to shoot and ultimately get underway in production development. Now, finally, after all of this time, after 9 years since Mad Max Fury Road, we have gotten this new movie, Furiosa, Mad Max Saga, and we got a chance to check this out over the course of the past couple of weeks. And so with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it over to you. What did you think about this new Mad Max film, Furiosa?
Bro, I'm gonna keep it simple. Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, is absolutely fucking fantastic. It is one of, if not one of the best action movies I've seen in a very, very, very long time. And I think we had fun with action last year, and so that's saying a lot. This movie is fun and epic and a saga in every sense I think of those words. I even had to ask myself, is Mad Max one of my favorite franchises? And before that wasn't a thought, right? All these movies are so spread apart. Of course, I really love Fury Road, which is just one of those movies that I do hold near and dear to me. I think that movie is quite untouchable. But Furiosa comes in as a prequel that technically nobody asked for. And George Miller tells you why you should have asked for it, or he makes you understand why this movie got made. It's bombastic, it's fun. The action is absolutely great and ridiculous and creative. And it's some of the most fun I had in a movie theater in a while. Anya Taylor-Joy, amazing. Mad Max, the character himself, always is made not to say too many words. And Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, Imperator Furiosa in this movie, of course, is supposed to be the same, not to be made not to say too many words. But we all know Anya Taylor-Joy has very specific eyes. She has very specific eyes, and everything she does in this movie lets you understand why she's playing Furiosa and why she's in this role, because she can do so much and communicate so much with her face. She did tremendous. Chris Hemsworth is having a blast, and it might be one of my favorite performances I've ever seen from Chris Hemsworth. I have to sit on that for a little bit and think about that, but everything he was doing in this movie felt true to him as an actor and the things that he can bring to the table. He is an action star, but also he is funny and he has really good timing. We've talked about that day in and day out. The comedic timing he has, and I think this role showed how serious can be and how funny he can be all in one, while keeping the action spirit within his character. What a great villain! I thought he was a really good villain. I might like him more than Immortal Joe. Like he had more to do to me, and I really liked him here, man. What else can I say about this movie, dude? There's so much. What I have to also talk about real quick, Aaliyah Brown, who plays young Furiosa. It actually takes a while before you get to older Anya Taylor-Joy Furiosa in this movie. I didn't know it was going to take that long, and at first, for a while, I was like, I was getting worried, like, oh man, where's Anya Taylor-Joy? But then when it all comes together, that young Furiosa, the performance from young Aaliyah Brown, was also everything to set up the later part of the movie. I thought they did a good job in that as well, man. Man, this movie is colorful. It's really everything I think that I needed, especially because we'll have a big conversation in a little bit, but blockbusters just haven't felt a lot of times the way they need to feel, and this movie feels like that. This movie feels like a blockbuster on the big screen in IMAX with all of these doing everything right in terms of filmmaking. Man, it was just a treat, and it definitely exceeded my expectations. Shout out to George Miller, shout out to all parties involved. I'm just very happy that this movie exists, man, to be honest, and I honestly, I can't wait to see it again.
So coming into Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, there was a lot to be excited about, but there was also, I think, a little bit to be concerned about because Mad Max Fury Road, when it came out in 2015, became one of the greatest cinematic action achievements of the 21st century, perhaps even ever, if we're being honest about it. It was just such a lightning bolt of a film that reinvented what action could look like on the big screen, especially within the context of this franchise, because it had been 30 years since the other Mad Max movie came out, Beyond Thunderdome, and to its own right, that original trilogy with Mel Gibson and what George Miller achieved, that was already sort of a semi-popular franchise, and The Road Warrior in particular, for a long time, which was my favorite film in the franchise, did receive a lot of critical acclaim just because of what it did in showcase with action, and it almost reinvented the franchise. And I think what's interesting about this entire saga up until this point is that no two films are alike, and that's why they stuck around so long. Mad Max is totally different than The Road Warrior. The Road Warrior totally different than Beyond Thunderdome, so on and so forth. And I think that that's why they have been successful and stuck around for 45 years now.
Mm-hmm.
But to follow up Fury Road, which, I think for many was the pinnacle of what you could probably achieve with this franchise. I mean, there was a lot that had to be expected of this movie, and taking a beloved character from that particular film, which nobody really knew anything about beyond what we saw with Charlize Theron, and then create a whole mythos and backstory around her. I mean, that could create some pause for some people, and it did for me, just because I'm not a fan of prequels. I do not like prequel movies. I typically don't like stories to go backwards. I want my movies and stories to move forward. I'm not the one that wants to fill in the blanks of what a character has been through, where they come from. Like, I'm not really interested in that, especially if that wasn't the intention from the get-go. But I think what separates Furiosa from many other prequels is the fact that it feels what a prequel movie should feel like. I think it actually achieves that objective of being a prequel more than what we ever see from any other example, just because it's not only about the character Furiosa, where she comes from, her upbringing, how she ended up in the circumstances that she did, but also just the world and how
Mm-hmm.
things are the way that they are and why some of the things are the way that they are. And they fill in those gaps and really just
Mm-hmm.
expand this world in such a great way, because one of the things that is worked in the favor of the franchise, but maybe also has played against it for some people, is the ambiguity of how we got here. Why are things the way that they are? Why did the world fall? Why is everybody
Mm-hmm.
walking around with these huge tanker trucks and there's no water, there's no natural resources? What the hell happened here? And to be honest, we don't still really have a concrete answer based on Furiosa and what happened here, but I'm fine with that. But what they did do was just really blow out the world, take us across the entire wasteland. We saw places like the Green Place, and we saw the Citadel again, and we saw Gastown, and all of these
Mm-hmm.
huge operations and all of these disparate factions across the film and across this universe that really just enrich the story of what we're witnessing with the character of Furiosa. And so just to even construct that and to build this world and to really just add in all of those levels and all of those layers, I have to commend George Miller and Nico Latouris for really just taking the time to flesh this all out in a meaningful way, because it all certainly adds to the backstory of Imperator Furiosa. Alila Brown as the young Imperator Furiosa in this movie, she has to carry a lot of the story for like the first hour. You don't see Anya Taylor-Joy until like after an hour into the movie, which is
Mm-hmm.
a huge ask of an audience member, because you don't see Alila Brown in really any of the marketing. You see her for like a couple of quick snippets in the trailer, but she has to do a lot as this younger version of the character. So this movie almost becomes a prequel of a prequel, which I don't know if that's going to work for a lot of people, but for me, I thought it was tremendous, just because that first act, when you see what happens between her and how she got snatched away from the Green Place, and you see what happens to her mother, that just adds so much emotional connection to her and where she's going to go in her lifetime, because she doesn't speak a lot of words in this movie. So they have to communicate everything visually, through action, through emotion, through less dialogue intensive scenes ultimately, while also propping up this big bad villain in Chris Hemsworth playing Dementis, which he himself also is doing just a wonderful job throughout this movie. I want to see the Dementis movie now, and he almost kind of takes this movie away around the halfway point. He owns so many of the scenes that he's in. Chris Hemsworth is super charismatic. He always shows up and does an incredible job. And ultimately, when Anya Taylor-Joy does come into the film, and you do see her really sort of take the reins, and it becomes this showdown between her and Dementis, and it's a revenge story at the end of the day. I became even more invested because we get some of the best action scenes once she comes into the movie. The one that takes place in the middle of the film is just awe-inspiring. It's just so incredible. There's a point in time in that scene where there's some people that are, sort of gliding on the back of cars, and then parachutes come out of nowhere. I had to lean forward in my chair. I'm like, yo, what is this? This is just adding on even more new inventive things into this universe. There was like a bird sort of mechanism that had a flamethrower attached. It's like, yo, they still come up with really, really creative things, even after all of the films and all of the inventive action sequences that we've seen out of this franchise up until this point. And so it really just grabbed hold of me at the beginning of it, and it never let go, I think. And ultimately, by the end of it, when you start to see some of those questions answered about how did this happen to her, and how did she end up in this place, and why did she all of a sudden associate herself with so-and-so, they start to really add the answers to those questions. And I felt totally invested. I felt super interested in that. And I'm just really, really happy that from just a filmmaking quality standpoint, the action goes to places that I still didn't expect it to go. But even more importantly, I think from a world building perspective, they just take this to an entirely different level. One of the big lines in the trailer from Chris Hemsworth is, do you have it in you to make it epic? And I think that was the meta sort of task that George Miller and Nico Lathoros had to go through. Like, can they make this a true action epic? And they did. They expanded the runtime. It's a 2.5-hour movie. The action sequences are big. It takes place over the course of like 15 years. And so it's a sweeping narrative. They really made this franchise something that can be considered like an action epic mythology with this world that they built out. And overall, it was a really fascinating result because of that. So I love this movie. I think it was absolutely a home run on the part of them. Obviously, based on the box office, we're going to talk a lot about that later on in this episode, the results of this film, and of course, other films and just the state of movie theaters. It may appear that this is the end of the line for the Mad Max franchise for the time being. I don't know if George Miller will have an opportunity to do these anymore. He's already 80, so it may not happen in his lifetime to make more Mad Max movies. I do think that eventually they will make more after they let it rest for a while, just because the appetite really isn't there, as we see with their box office results. But at some point, a future filmmaker, a future visionary is going to have to take this on. And they're going to have extremely big shoes to fill, because what they've achieved across these 5 films, it's a pretty fascinating result. And I think it's certainly cemented itself as one of the best action franchises that we've seen over the past half century at least. And so I was just absolutely knocked out by Furiosa. Before we quickly move on, what's your ranking of the Mad Max films? It's 5 of them. With this movie now in play, what would you rank in terms of the films and where they fall?
Man, that's such a hard question now, man, with all of these under our belt, because Mad Max 2 does hold a special place as well. It's between 2 or 3. I know that for sure. It's between 2 or 3. Is it the second spot or the third spot? I have to sit on it a little longer. As of right now, I'm gonna go ahead and put it the second spot, bro. I think this is my second favorite Mad Max movie, underneath Fury Road. Just off the high of what I watched in this film, this is right now my second favorite Mad Max movie. I think.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with that.
that's fair. Yeah, I think a lot of people would probably tend to agree. Also, a big factor that we have to take into consideration has just been the technological advancements. What we can do today could not be achieved in the 1980s when the original trilogy was underway. And then Fury Road obviously proved that. I still think that is the masterpiece, of course, of this franchise. Again, one of the greatest action films that we've seen in the past 25-30 years. And so that's number 1 for me. Number 2, I still have The Road Warrior. I just have such a long relationship with that movie. So The Road Warrior is still 2 for me, because that also sort of reinvented action for its time, and I think Furiosa would fall at 3 just for now, only because it doesn't reinvent anything in particular. It reinvents things for this franchise, but not in terms of movie making and filmmaking and what can be achieved. But it's absolutely an achievement in its own right. After that, I would put the original Mad Max movie, which is a sleeper hit, and then last place would be Beyond Thunderdome. Really like the first half of that movie. The second half gets kind of weird, but
yeah, the
kids
kids
stuff
you
is
be like, what's going on with the kids?
yeah, really, really
What is this?
strange choices there, but still a solid, okay film, still a watchable film. But ultimately, man, this was just again another great achievement on the part of George Miller and company. And so, folks, those are all of our thoughts on Furiosa, Mad Max Saga. If you've checked this movie out, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.